Presentation capital plan funding updates. Finance Director, Steve Smigiel.
Sorry for the yells. How's that, better? Good afternoon, everyone. You should have a spreadsheet in front of you, hard copy. It's a 5-year history of the capital plan, funding sources and expenses. And Chairman Smith asked me to come and give the board an update based on some comments and concerns maybe that have been raised in prior meetings relative to how we fund the plan, and I think more importantly, how did we get to the point from 1 year ago to today and in need of a projected or a suggested bond issue of $20 million. So what I tried to do was put a little history together for you on this spreadsheet going back to 2014 in terms of where we started with fund balance available in the capital improvement fund, which was about $15 million at the time. All the various funding proceeds, be it bonds, interest, insurance. We may have some general fund contribution. We do get a little bit of money here or there from state and local programs. And then showing at least expenditures in total for that year. And then at the bottom of the spreadsheet by year, I've tried to group in major categories. I didn't go project by project by project, but in major categories, the expenditures for that particular year. And as you'll see, and as was presented when we presented the 2018 through 2022 plan, we're looking at about $13.4 million in fund balance as we transition from 2017 to 2018. That's our projection at the time based on current spending levels. We have built into the 2018 recommended budget a $7 million contribution from the general fund, which would give us about $20 million of available funding, exclusive of any other funding sources, to fund about $40 million of projects in 2018. And that, again, is if we fund everything on the list. And there's a number of things in terms of F&O projects and including the Central Campus project. There's IT. We have more and more technology coming on board, so that costs money to maintain and replace. So hence the need for a $20 million bond issue. And I know the question has been raised in the past, well, how did we get to this point? Why didn't we know about this earlier? It just did not pop up on the radar, or what's going on? And I think really I can summarize it in 5 main bullet points, which is, one, as you know, it has been reported on an ongoing basis from the executive's office, the scope of the downtown project has expanded. We've found things that we didn't expect to find and addressed needs things that needed to be addressed at the time. So the scope is expanded by quite a bit of money, as you all know. The Emergency Management Department is asking for about $6 million to replace all the radios on the 800 megahertz system, which was put in 10 or 12 years ago. So that amount of money was identified by Vicki Wolber last year, just about the time we were finalizing the plan. It didn't make it on the plan last year, so we put it on the plan this year. That was the fault of my office. So I just want to make it clear that she had identified that a year ago. So it appeared on the 2018 plan. Of course, we know we have a new administration over at Public Works. They have asked for $1 million from the general fund to assist in scanning and imaging all of their drawings for all of the drains. So the proposal put forward by Commissioner Miller was that the cost would be estimated at about $2 million. The drain funds would pay half, the general fund would pay half. So there's quite a bit of money there. And at the time the plan was put together, you'll recall that emergency management was recommending or suggesting that we put security cameras along the lake. There's, I think, 6 of them, and that was gonna be partially grant funded and partially funded by the general fund. That grant has now been rejected since then. That needs to come off the plan, but that was about a $750,000 contribution from the general fund. You add those 4 items together, and I think we're like 16 or $16.5 million that sort of wasn't on the plan a year ago. And then just IT in general. IT is quite expensive to maintain. It's a great thing to have, but people are asking for more scanning, not just Public Works. You have system replacements at the Sheriff's Department, for example, that are quite old or not being maintained anymore, those kinds of things. All of that added together comes up with this $40 million, and that's where we are in terms of, suggesting or recommending that we issue bonds if we're gonna do all of those projects.
Okay, Commissioner Leonetti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you, Steve. Thanks for doing this kind of historical spreadsheet. On the bottom section of the spreadsheet here, $18 million is for building projects other than central campus. And that's almost close to the $20 million bond idea that we're floating around. I mean, it's $18 million. So what other projects are we talking about other than central campus? And I've took notes. You bullet pointed 5 different things. IT, Public Works, the radio thing is listed on here. The only one of those bullet points that that aren't on there is like Public Works and I guess the expansion of the downtown project. Is that what those building projects are other than the central campus? Can you give me a little more detail about what that $18 million is?
It's a lot of things, actually.
I figured that.
So if you look at the plan itself as we submitted it, there's about $27 million of, I'll call it building projects or that sort of thing. You back out the $8 million for the downtown project, and what's left is the $18 million.
Okay.
And it could be anything from repairs at the jail. I'm just kind of looking at the list. There's about $2.5 million. There's replacing the cameras in the intercom system at the jail is just shy of 2.8. There's replacing the rooftop unit at the Majestic Center in Warren is 1.8. Replacing all the HVAC units at the health department over here in Mount Clemens is 2.1. I mean, all of those things added together. I could go on. There's a number of them that all add up to this $18 million.
Okay. In a way, is the $20 million extra that we're looking for, is it designed to cover those other projects? I mean,
We
18,
would bundle, in my mind, we haven't sat down, myself and the executive's office, to kind of look at what we would fund with that $20 million. We would most likely bundle a number of those infrastructure type of projects.
Okay.
Because what we like to do is issue bonds for projects or items that are going to have a useful life at least equal to the length of the bonds. We wouldn't necessarily issue bonds for something that were 20-year bond for something that's going to last 5 years, for example.
Would we be able to, assuming when you have that talk with the executive, would we be having an idea of then how you would bundle it? I mean, if you're going to bond, we would know exactly what the bond money.
Yeah, because we would have to come back to you
well, of course,
to approve all the bond documents and the whole
Right.
issue. And any part of a bond issue document is going to identify projects
Okay.
that are being funded by that issue.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Steve.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Carabelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve, a couple of questions. And again, I know these are going to be broad type questions. So I guess I got to try to get a little bit of understanding myself. That's why I'm going to ask some of these. Like, for example, the jail. I know there was a study done. And I know that they're looking to probably make a recommendation to the board sometime soon. Is that fair
I
statement?
think that's fair.
Okay. So with that said, I know we have to maintain to a certain standard. So I question, $1 million here, $2 million there for the jail. I know certain things, obviously we have to do just because of state law. But these are things that I really would like to take a look at with you guys and really get an understanding. Because knowing that if it's gonna be a new jail, if it's gonna be a rehab, whatever it is, before we spend X, I struggle with that. And I just need to kind of get my arms around it. I look at the radios. And you said, how long ago was it?
I think 2005, I believe, is when we issued bonds for that system.
If I'm not mistaken, since I've been up here on the board, and I guess the other commissioners that have been here longer than I, we did spend a lot of money in the last 8 years, a bunch of money. And I thought it was a switch over from either new towers we did.
We built new towers. That was on the plan a year or two ago.
Okay.
So we built new towers. This is, if I recall correctly, this is to replace the radio units themselves.
Okay. And for some reason, I think that was already, again, I could be wrong. I got to get my arms around that because I remember there was a discussion, should it be Motorola? Should it be this? Should it be that one? And I remember going through a whole thing on this. And again, I got to get my arms around to understand it better. I look at, you said you're going to take the cameras. They're not going to give you that grant. So are we still?
I think that's off the list at this point.
Right, but was it money already spent, or is that money
No.
going back? So that 750 you mentioned is going to go back?
It
to
just
the
kind
general-
of it goes back into the fund balance, if you will, or reduces the amount of the bonds or whatever.
Right, and you know what I mean? I just would
like.
like to understand, then I understand the scanning of all that stuff. We've, not that I recall, and maybe you can help me out, in the last, 9 years, pulling money out for the drain office for scanning. I mean, I've never,
Not to my knowledge.
and again, I got to get my arms around to have a better understanding. Is there a way that can be taxed upon the stuff that they got going on instead of it coming out of the general fund? I know things need to happen, but, from grants or all this other stuff, but taking $1 million out, a lot of money,
Right.
Like I said, it all adds
There could
up.
be, there could be documents other than the drawings for the drains as well,
And I
which is
get
a
that.
discussion that needs to be had.
You're right. I want to get my arms around it.
Right.
And then I guess the next question would be for Deputy Executive Deldin, if I could ask a question. This IT stuff, and I was always the first to admit, not my game. And with that said, we had a study done. I believe your office commissioned it, and that was a while ago. Is there a plan before we go into, and I know there's needs, and again, I don't understand, that's why we hired a professional to come in and help us. Before we go any of these large expenses, are we looking to commission another study on what we're looking to do? Is it the right direction?
We can do it. The study that was done 4 or 5 years ago was really more of a vulnerability assessment. 5 or 6 years, I should say this without criticizing. In the last 5 or 6 years, our IT department, leadership, staff, equipment, systems has come a long way from where it was. And part of it is because of the outside consultants we brought in to make some very strong recommendations on what we should be doing to protect our systems because of our vulnerability. A lot of that's been addressed. But with technology like our cell phones, things change in the world. And we have made a significant investment, this board, in technology just since the fire when our server area was compromised. And it's one of those things that once you buy a computer or a cell phone, you gotta keep refreshing systems ongoing. And I don't know very much about technology myself, so I'm trying not to. I can't go too deep in the weeds without looking foolish.
Okay, and again, maybe my memory, yours must be better than mine. I thought it was about 10 years ago it was done, and then 5 years ago it was kind of expired, like it was time to do another one.
Yeah, I'm not sure about, I only know about the study that was commissioned with the executive's office back in 2011 or 2012.
And again, I know less than you do about this.
Yeah.
So with that said, for us to make millions and millions of dollars of investments, switches and lockers and all the stuff that we did do, again, I didn't understand it, but the professional says, yes, this is it. I think this is something
Sure.
that I'm going to need help getting my arms around from a professional.
Sure, okay. If I could just comment on the jail, the discussion about the jail. So there is a request for proposal out on the street right now. It's due in early December. That was undertaken by the sheriff's office along with F&O. So it is out on the Mitten site right now, and it really is for design development. The design phase, schematic design phase, it's a term that's used where you go in and you estimate or figure out what it is you need, and they will use that jail analysis as a guide to determine what's needed. You stop there, and then you estimate what it's going to cost, because we can't go any further until the board has a good understanding of what the needs are, and everybody wants to know what the dollar cost is. But to be reminded, I doubt that the recommendation is going to be to build a brand new jail, because we just put $12 to $15 million in the tower just in the last 3 or 4 years. And what the architects and the consultants are telling us, that we probably have extended the useful life of the tower by 15 to 20 years. It's the other areas. It's the first floor. It's the other areas of the jail. Some dating back to the early 1950s, that really needs to be taken offline. But being that it's 24/7 operation and no alternative place to put prisoners, we got to keep pumping money in there. And at some point, hopefully, we'll be able to replace portions of the jail. But a lot of the money that gets put into it is in the tower, which is going to stay.
Sure. I don't know where you guys are at. I don't know
Right.
what direction, if we're rehabbing, if we're adding on, what the deal is. But like you said, you mentioned 12 million, well, then there's $1 million for the kitchen, the Sally Port.
Yeah, plus that.
I can think,
Yeah.
of 40 million.
Right.
Well, pretty soon it adds up to real money.
That's
And
right.
At the end of the day, by law, we're required to have a jail. By law, this is something that can be bonded to the people. I just, again, the bigger picture of, $2 million here, $1 million there, going into the next budget, yet they're coming in, you may be a recommendation. I gotta get my arms to understand, if we are gonna redo it, are we gonna be tearing out some of that, $3-4 million we're gonna be putting in the next year? You know what I'm saying? I gotta get an understanding.
Possibly, yeah. I don't know that yet, possibly, but again, it's an operation that we can't take offline because we have no place to put them. So we got to keep dumping good money after bad money until we can stop the bleeding.
Yep, no, I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks.
Thank you. Chair Smith?
Thank you. These are, for Steve. No, come on back up, Mark. No, I'm just kidding. Figure I'd wait till you got all the way down. So, Steve, let me ask you about the 800 megahertz radio. You said that she came to you last year just as you guys were kind of finalizing the budget, and you didn't put it in. So last year would have been 216, kind of in the middle of it, but it shows that in 216 we already spent $6.6 million.
No, that's unrelated. That's a different project. That's what this project is the building of the new towers.
Oh, radio
The
towers.
project
oh, I'm
I'm
sorry.
speaking
Yep,
of is
okay.
replacing all the radios that were purchased 10 or 12 years ago when we put the system in originally. They're very similar. That project's somewhere around a $8 or $9 million
Right.
project. There's local match involved from the city of Warren and all those sorts of things. So
Right.
the numbers look similar, but they're different projects.
So you don't have am I missing it? You don't have the $8 million then in any of your little, your bullet points on the bottom then, the anticipated 800 megahertz upgrades? Am I missing?
It's going to be built into, there's $2 million built into 18 and $4 million built into 19. So
In which,
the 2 million is going to be into building projects other than Central Campus.
Okay.
Probably should be classified under emergency management, but
all right. So 2 million of that is 18, and then 19, you're talking about the rest of the 4
6
million?
million, yeah. Or
six-
4 million
six,
for a
no,
total of
is it?
6.
Okay. All right. And then, so just like last year, I mean, we came to the realization that when we talked to IT and they had a project wish list, that at the end of the day, basically he said that we probably won't get to 2/3 of these or less. So I guess what I'm wondering is, you know, the capital projects are always, you know, what we would really like to do. But I mean, in reality, have you guys, I know there's not as much detail put into the capital projects as once they actually come to light, then we're going to start looking at how much money and is this feasible and are we, you know, but what are we looking at as far as this $40 million? I mean, that actually is, I mean, pretty solid in your mind that we're doing. I mean, no, you gave it to us so that, you know, but you know what I'm asking, right? I mean, how much of this do you really anticipate getting done in next year out of $40 million?
I would anticipate that the building projects, we could likely start if we bundle them together. We got to talk with Lynn and facilities to find out, you know, what we could reasonably start and have all going on at one point in time. I think your point of the IT area is fairly accurate in terms of there are a lot of projects. I think there's $4.7 million of system-related projects that Jaco has identified as being targeted in 18. Whether he can complete all those, he probably could. I shouldn't say probably. It's possible that he could if he brought in consultants from the outside to help. I think he's, if I recall correctly, last year he mentioned that, you know, with his existing staff, it probably couldn't be done. Those projects are identified as being funded through the, you know, general fund contribution essentially and existing fund balance. So if that didn't happen, we wouldn't fund those.
Right. And I guess that's my point. Building projects, you hire out, so that's a different ballgame. We're not looking at
Right.
our own capacity of workers, but ongoing facilities maintenance, you know, $4 million. You know, there's a lot of these in along with IT that we're really counting on having enough manpower to do all of this kind of stuff.
Well,
So-
and some of those ongoing facilities management, I think, are brought in from the outside. That's tuck
Okay.
pointing and parking lot repaving, rooftop, you know,
Okay.
maintenance and those sorts of things.
And are these, like, so I know that you didn't break them down individually, but do you rank these things when it comes down to it in level of importance?
The ongoing maintenance projects.
No, just in general, the whole the capital fund projects. I mean, there's got to be a general, like, these are
Well-
hot, these are, you know, mild, these are like, we would like to get these done,
Yeah,
but they're
so
not.
for the building related items,
Mm-hmm.
so when we ask Lynn to schedule things out by year, we then of the approach that what she's identified for 18 is basically what she needs to complete in 18. That's priority. So it's prioritized by year. Now,
Okay.
within a year,
Right.
you know, certain things can be
Right.
reprioritized within a year.
Understand. And then I'm not too familiar with the whole bonding thing, so when you bond something, you have to bond them to an actual project,
Typically, yeah.
and
So that the you know, the purchasers or the investors have an idea of what
Right.
your,
so is it,
you know,
on our
funding-
capital projects, so when you give us that whole list of capital projects, I mean, let's just say it's kind of a general wish list of what you think you're going to do, but you're not by any means mandated to do those projects. In a bond, is it similar, or do you guys have to hit those
no,
projects? Or is
typically,
some,
if you bond for a specific project, you need to do those specific projects.
Okay. All right. I think that's it for now. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, yes.
I just
Yep.
wanted to, while we're on that point, I just want to caution the board that the five-year capital plan is not really a wish list. And yes, things could be prioritized, but typically what you see in the very first year is what F&O or technology deemed to be the highest priority. That's why we're asking for the funding for those projects to be done this year or next year.
I'd understand that. I'm sorry, but I think I meant, I did mean, you don't have to do those just because other things might come up and things, but they're not
Sometimes,
mandated
yes.
to necessarily do those projects that were listed
We're
for
not mandated
18,
because,
right? So that's,
because sometimes, you know, something might break next week that
Yeah,
we don't even
exactly.
have on the list.
So I call
and
it
then we got to determine what are we going to hold off on because we've only got so much money to spend. I'll just give you one example. You will probably see, if you look back, for 3 or 4 years, you will see the Mount Clemens Health Center, which is the health department over adjacent from the jail. We've had on that list to replace the rooftop. There's 5 rooftop heating and cooling units. We've had them on the list now for 3 or 4 years. It started off being about 1.8 million because of inflation. It's now on today's list for about 2.1. But if there's anybody that can squeeze the life out of our operating systems, it's Lynn Bricks from F&O. And I just found out a couple weeks ago that 2 of those rooftop units date back to 1968. The other 3 date back to 1984. And they need to be replaced. And every year that we put these off, and she has put them off because she can get another season out of them, but we're at a critical point right now, and it's going to cost more money. So it's like when we move something from one year to the next, it doesn't fall into the abyss. We're just pushing it off. Eventually, the bill's going to come due for all the projects that are on there.
All right.
So just a clarification.
Sure, thanks. And Steve, I guess kind of to that point, when we a lot of times we'll move things down the list due to different reasons, and sometimes we pull things up the list. And I think I remember Crystal going through this. When we pull things up the list, do things automatically go down and fill that position monetarily, or would you, like, say we pulled something from 19 to 18? You would think that would leave a general a gap of whatever amount of money that was.
Right, so we have so much funding available, so much is appropriated each year, so we know our funding limit. Now, whether we, say you have a project on this year's list and it costs more than you thought, so we'll put something else off to fund the additional, or as you said, you might pull something that's on next year's list and it breaks. Now you need to pull it ahead this year. We'll take something off the list for this year to be able to pull that other project forward. And at the end of the day, again, we have so much money in the bank, more or less, so we have a fund balance plus existing year appropriation. So we have a funding limit. Once we get to that funding limit, then we would have to come back to the board to ask for additional funding if there were other things that needed to be done. So say everything on this year's list needed to be done, plus something happened to something on next year's list that needed to be pulled forward. We don't have funding. We'd have to come to you to ask for additional appropriation.
All right, thank you. I'm good. I don't have anything else right now.
Thank you. Commissioner Romano.
Thank you, Chair. Steve, maybe you can explain this to me when you mentioned something about the public works and the TV imaging for the infrastructures that they're doing on the drains. We're talking about almost $1 million here. Now, most of the commissioners here on the board are on drain commissions with Drain Commissioner Candace Miller. And her statement was, at every particular drain, there's additional money there to do infrastructure imaging so that they don't have to bother anybody else for that because there's excess money that's never been used. And yet and I'm asking because now you're saying that they would pay half and we would pay half. Has something changed that all of a sudden this money's not available in these drain commission coffers anymher?
No, we have to have those conversations with Commissioner Miller. And I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, I think there's other items that need to be imaged over there as well, not just specific drawings for the drains. They have soil erosion permits and all sorts of other things. But that's what IT has identified as kind of the split. Now, whether we get to that point of doing that, we'd have to have discussions with Public Works Office.
Okay, so I'm looking at $1 million, and piggybacking on what Chairman Smith said about, and again what Mr. Deldin said about what we need and what are actual necessities, and you brought up the HVAC system or the on top of the buildings here, and they've gone along for whatever number of years there are, and she squeezes out year by year. That's a lot of money just in that alone, and I guess the question would be, and maybe it's a ridiculous question, so why not squeeze out another year and get the absolute necessities that we need within that $20 million, which would reduce that amount, just as $1 million would may possibly be reduced by the imaging because Ms. Miller has said that they have money in each drain fund to do that. I'm just looking to see that, I know you wouldn't ask unless you needed, but the question again remains, is this an absolute necessity that it can't be reduced, that 20 million by certain amounts by just putting some of this stuff that is still working? Unfortunately, it's old, but it still works. And we're talking about getting new stuff because we're going to save money. Well, you're always going to save money if you get it now and don't get it 5 years from now because costs are going to go up. But are we better off waiting and then getting this stuff done at a later date because it's still working? It's kind of a general question, but I'm kind of confused about what is actually a necessity and what we could put off for a while, and that's where I'm at right now. I don't know if there's an answer for it, Mr. Smigiel. Maybe you have one. Uh-oh, here comes Mr. Deldin. He's got one.
I certainly can appreciate what you say, but most of us would prefer our roof not to leak, but repair it when we think it's at the end of our useful life. There are other things that need to happen over at the health department that's bundled in that 2.1. The ductwork above the ceilings has to change. The ceilings are 35 or 40 years old, so we're going to go in and put in LED lights and new ceiling panels while we're in there and putting in all new ductwork. So it's kind of a domino effect. And just to get economies of scale, if we're going to bid out the job, let's replace all 5 rooftops that are 33 to 50 years old. Let's be proactive, and sometimes we need to do preventative maintenance because it saves us money in the long run. And if the heating unit were to go down in the middle of winter and we have hundreds of people in that building a day, and we know that they're beyond their useful life, I just don't think it's good planning on administration's part to operate that way. But could we try to squeeze by one more winter? We could, but it's not being advised by my experts, and I'm relying on an administrator who's been here 43 years to say these really need to be replaced.
Thank you. Okay, at the end of your conversation with Chair Smith just a second ago, and I was doing some math over here, and I think we've had the same conversation. You talked about if you had a shortage here, that you would have to put this project off to use that money to pay for the shortage over here, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have a couple of questions about that. And the first is, with regard to the 65 million, it looks that over and above the contingency, we spent about 15% more than the estimated cost on that project. And you've given us a list of reasons why that occurred. So I just want to make sure I understand administration's position on that. So if you spent, if how much did we put in the budget for 2017? Originally, it looks like 40 million. So if you overspent by 40 million in the $65 million projects, then would it be administration's position that you could spend 40 million from the capital plan and put off all the projects to pay for the overages? I'm just generally speaking on philosophy. It's not something that would likely happen. But if you were able to spend 9 million over without coming back to us, I'm just trying to first get a hold of what your philosophy is on what our roles are, because I'm not sure. Okay, go ahead on that one.
Yeah.
I just, the terminology concerns me. There were not overages on this downtown project. We stopped gathering projects when we reached $65 million. We are not completely renovating the 16th Circuit Court building. We're only doing specific floors. The reason we stopped at 65 million was because work had to take place. We said enough is enough. Finance said, look, I'm not comfortable bonding for more than $45 million because we can't afford the mortgage payment beyond that. We knew we were willing to spend down some of our fund balance. If you recall, 3-4 years ago, our fund balance was 42%. Mm-hmm. So we were willing to spend some of our fund balance to burn that down. And we knew we had $9 or $10 million coming in insurance proceeds. We stopped at 65 million. but we knew all along that we were going to probably spend more, in part because the board said, roll some of these capital plan projects that are on the list for this downtown campus into your bid documents, because we'll get some economies of scale. But then, like with many construction programs, especially when you're dealing with old buildings, you open up walls, a stairway collapses, smoke dampers need to be upgraded that we didn't know about at the beginning, and it adds money to the project. But we are doing a lot more than $65 million worth of projects. It's not like the scope has stayed the same, but now it's costing us $74 million. We're doing more projects. And we knew
Yes.
from day one we were doing more. So it's not overages. The scope, as Steve had said earlier, the scope of the project has expanded.
Absolutely, I understand that, and particularly, I said, with an old building, you don't know what's behind the walls, and things come up. So I'm not trying to indicate that you went on a spending spree and overspent. If it came across that way, I apologize. And we talked about, with respect to doing the projects while we're renovating, it's a good time to do those other projects, would drop down future years. So for me, if you were doing a bunch of next year's projects, then that 20 million wouldn't be needed, because next year's projects would have dropped down dramatically. But I want to, so part of what I want to understand with respect to that is, and the reason I asked you about the 40 million is, I know that when it's not part of the capital plan, I believe projects, is it over 35,000 comes to us? Is that the number?
Yeah, 35,000 on typical purchases. I think the purchasing policy says 100,000 on construction projects, I think.
Oh, I thought it was 250, but either,
It may be. It
either
might
way,
be.
even if it's 250, whatever caused the 9 million, I was looking at that and saying, nobody came back to us. So I'm trying to figure out that 250 threshold. And Steve, I probably have to give this to you to remind you. You gave us a document, and I wasn't here for the meeting, so I apologize. It was on August 31st. No, this is on the 23rd. I was there for that. I was trying to ask you guys in the hallway that one day about this. You have the original budget for 2017, and I showed you this recently, Steve, this document. It had the original budget for the 5-year capital plan that was not the $65 million project, was at 40 million, and the amended budget went up to 48. And I said, we never amended that. And then remember, we looked at some of those numbers, and you realized that some of those things may not have taken place because they got put off. Therefore, you thought that $48 million was an incorrect number.
Yeah, some of those things should have been reductions. I showed increases for central campus. There should have been some corresponding reductions.
Okay.
Projects that were pushed off, so.
So is it possible for us to get this document again with the corrected numbers, and I can show it to you before you leave so you know exactly what I'm talking about?
Was that big spreadsheet?
No, it's,
No, this is the mid-year
all right,
update
okay,
kind of a thing.
fine.
okay, so, and on there, and this may have been some of the confusion too, on there I was asking you about, I realized I don't remember capital plan projects above the 250 coming to us. And there was somewhere on one of these papers I was showing with you is, okay, it was the elevator replacement and upgrades. And the original budget was 600,000. This isn't central campus renovations, right? Because the very first one is central campus renovations. So this is down here, it's not part of that. So it had 600, and then the amended budget was 926. And I didn't remember voting on the original 600, let alone voting on a change order, changing it to 926. So my question is, what are your internal procedures to ensure that if it has to come to the board for approval, that it makes it to us. And that might be a finance thing. I'm not sure who does the internal protocols on that.
Yeah, Commissioner Kleinfeld, specific to the elevators, this has been a very long ongoing project. I believe, and we'd have to go back and check the records, I believe that we brought the elevator project to replace all the elevators in the Circuit Court building and the old county building to this board back in 2011. It was one of the first, it was competitively bid, and for some reason I thought it was maybe $1.1 million. The reason it's taken so long is because when we had the fire in the old county building, we stopped. One car had already been replaced. The second car was delayed by 2 years. But it may have shown up someday one day some years ago as a $600,000 item, but when it was competitively bid and brought to this board to authorize that expenditure, it was somewhere between the $900,000 you mentioned and I thought it was 1.1, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
But I want to say that was in 2011 or maybe early 2012.
And I don't think all of my questions with respect to that come directly out of the departments that are overseen by the county executive either. Some of these jail renovations, I wondered the same thing. So that's why I was wondering what the internal process is to make sure, because, as elected officials come and go and you get new elected officials in, they may make a purchase out of their budget that they don't have the authority to without coming to us. And that's why I was
Right.
trying to get a handle on
Specific to jail renovations, I remember coming to this board a couple of years ago and authorizing Burnco, I believe. It was $6 or $7 million that was presented and approved by this board.
Okay, well, so my point is,
We bring those things forward, is my point. Is we
Okay.
bring those things forward to
I
you.
think what my question, so say another countywide elected goes and spends $35,000 on something that they don't have, that they have to bring to us. I'm trying to find out how the internal process works. So that's the question that I keep asking, not whether or not this was voted on or that was voted on. I'm just trying to get an understanding of the internal process, really briefly, on how that takes place.
It depends on what's being purchased, I guess, would be my first comment. If there's a contract associated with whatever they're purchasing, it could be goods and services, could be probably professional services generally, or something along those lines. Those contracts get routed through my office, including risk management, corp counsel, and ultimately the exec's office. And you'll see them multiple times. We bring a number of contracts here. So if there's a contract, then that gets routed, and there's a whole internal process, goes through board sync and all those sorts of things, determines if it's 35 or more. We determine, which contracts come to the board and which ones don't. Not everything do we purchase via contract. We may just go out and buy something, order something, we get an invoice and we pay it, depending on what it is.
Okay. All right, thank you. Commissioner Leonetti, did you put your name on there again?
I did, just as
Okay,
for on the
thanks.
second
Go
round,
ahead.
if I may.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. This is for you, Steve. There was something, and I know we paid down some things, but there was a comment by Executive Deldin that you were concerned at one point that $44 million, anything above $45 million in bond would be something that we couldn't afford. And now we're looking at adding another $20 million. Where are we on the payment of the original bond of $45 million? Do we have any idea of how where we're at on that? You couldn't answer
We
that.
issued it in 15, so we only made a couple
Sure.
years of principal payments.
Sure.
And there's $3-some million in debt service a year, I believe. get to it. At the end of 2017, we will have $39.3 million left outstanding.
Okay, so $39 million outstanding. And now let's assume we add another 20 million. That's going to put us up to $59 million. Is there something about our financial situation as a whole that you feel more comfortable financing $59 million as opposed to, and I don't want to, and I don't know, Deputy Executive Deldin had said 45 million back in 2015. We didn't want to ask for more than that because you felt it was too much to finance anything above 45. Am I correct when you said that?
At the
Okay.
time.
At the time.
So when we started thinking about the downtown project and what we could afford to pay in cash versus what we could pay in bonds, we were talking back in 2014. That was all wrapped around with the retiree health care issue as well.
Okay.
So when we look at these things, at the time we're considering it, we look at the fund balance, we look at the 10-year projection at the time, figure out what we can afford, what we can't, and that happens every time we will do this. So with this, if we want to do all these projects, what we're saying is we need a $20 million bond issue. We have factored that in and factored that debt service into the 10-year projection.
Okay.
So we know how that affects the bottom line, if you will.
Okay.
in
And
our
you don't
fund.
have any reservations because essentially it
No,
will
I mean,
be
I've
59.
said over and
Right.
over that, as we look out 4 or 5 years, we need to be, careful in terms of how we spend and what we do with our discretionary spending. These items here, as Deputy Deldin was mentioning earlier, you've got rooftop units at the health department that are 50 years old. If those things, go down, all of a sudden now you're in a scramble mode versus a planned replacement.
I get all that, and I get everything that was presented here.
Correct.
The question I had is, are we in a financial position now to be able to afford the debt financing if we add $20 million to what
No,
we
we
already
factored that into the long-term projection.
Well, you answered my question. Thanks, Steve. All right, thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Carabelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hey, on the sheet that you passed out, just so I can have an understanding, you get 14, 15, all the way through to 18 projected. Then your 2014 through 2018, your last number. Are those lines totaled at the end? Is that what
All
that-
except the big top line, whereas the big fund balance at the beginning of the year, that total comes from the 2014 column, because that was the beginning of the whole 5-year period.
Okay.
So everything else, if my math is working correctly, all the other totals should be the total of the 5 columns.
Okay, so is it my understanding, by looking at this, if bond proceeds projected in 2018 of your 20 million, my fund balance end of year 18 is going to be only 185,000?
In the capital improvement fund, and that all ties back to the 2018 through 2022 plan that we submitted.
Right, and we don't have any general, or no, we still have general fund contribution of 7 million.
7 million.
I guess, again, I gotta get my arms around it. I understand we needed X amount in reserves in the general fund, but also in capital projects, I thought we always wanted to have a minimum in there, saying, in case something major happened, such as a rooftop unit, a generator system. With that, we're gonna end up with 185,000.
Right, if something catastrophic happened, it's not on the plan, we'd have to come back for an appropriation.
And fellow commissioner, I don't want to belabor this. I'd like to get a hold of you, sit down, so I can really kind of understand this, because I want to do it once and do it right, and I want to make sure I got a good grip on it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions? I don't have anybody on here. I should have already done it. Can I get a motion to receive and file? Moved by Toko, supported by Carabelli. Vote on your iPads.